She told me while the microwave hummed behind her, reheating noodles that had gone cold while we argued about nothing in particular. And the way she said it made the words feel like background noise instead of something meant to tear my life in half. It wasn't a dramatic announcement, no trembling voice or tears, just a casual statement delivered like she was asking me to grab more napkins. She said she wanted to put our marriage on hold, while she traveled overseas for a corporate assignment that would last just under a month, explaining that the distance would give her space to think, to breathe, to understand what she wanted. I remember staring at the condensation on my glass, watching droplets slide down as if they were racing toward the table, wondering when exactly we had crossed the line from partnership into something that felt like a contract with exit clauses. I asked her what she meant by space, by pause, by clarity, and the irritation that flashed across her face told me I wasn't supposed to ask at all. She wanted agreement, not dialogue, acceptance without questions, and the realization settled deep in my chest that this wasn't a request but a decision she'd already made alone. When I finally said yes, when I nodded and told her to take whatever time she needed, I saw confusion replace her confidence, as if she had rehearsed every possible reaction except calm indifference. And in that moment, I understood that the real test wasn't whether she needed distance, but whether I would collapse without her approval. The days leading up to her departure felt surreal, like living inside a glass box where everything looked normal but sounded distant and hollow, and I watched her move through the house with a nervous energy that only grew when I refused to argue. She hovered in doorways, lingered behind me when I watched television, dropped hints about how long she'd be gone as if waiting for me to protest, and each time I responded with the same neutral tone, offering nothing that would confirm the script she had written in her head. The morning she left, the sky was pale and gray, the kind of color that made everything feel unfinished, and I brewed coffee as if it were any other weekday, handing her a travel mug at the door while she studied my face for cracks. Her hesitation was almost visible, like a weight pulling her backward, and when she finally stepped into the waiting car, I felt the air in the house shift, not empty but honest, as if something unspoken had finally been acknowledged. I stood in the quiet after the engine faded, letting the stillness settle, realizing that for the first time in years I wasn't adjusting my mood to match hers or bracing for criticism, and the absence of that constant tension felt less like loneliness and more like relief. That first afternoon alone, I did something that would have sparked a lecture only a week earlier. I made food she hated, turned on music she complained about, and left the dishes where they were because I wanted to, not because I was trying to prove anything. It was a small rebellion, insignificant on the surface, yet it felt monumental, like reclaiming a part of myself I had slowly given away without noticing. As the evening stretched on, I thought about how often I had filtered my words, delayed my plans, abandoned friendships, all in the name of keeping the peace, and how easily those compromises had become expectations rather than choices. I reached out to an old friend I hadn't seen in years, someone she dismissed as a bad influence, and when he answered with genuine surprise and warmth, I felt something inside me loosen, as if the tight knot of my daily life had finally been cut. We talked for hours, laughing about the past and acknowledging the distance that had grown between us, and when I hung up, I realized that the silence in my home no longer felt heavy, but full of possibility. The following morning, I took time off work under the pretense of needing rest, but what I truly needed was perspective, and I scheduled a consultation with a legal professional not because I had decided to leave, but because I wanted to understand my reality without illusions. Sitting in that office, surrounded by shelves of case files and the faint smell of old paper, I told my story, and for the first time I heard it reflected back to me without excuses or minimization. The attorney explained that what my spouse had asked for was not uncommon, that people often framed emotional exits as self-discovery, and that ambiguity was a powerful tool when someone wanted freedom without responsibility. He suggested I prepare, gather records, understand my rights, not as an act of aggression, but as self-preservation, And as I left, clutching a folder that felt heavier than it looked, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. It wasn't fear that drove me now, but clarity, the kind that comes when you finally see a pattern instead of isolated incidents. I returned home and decided to invest in myself in ways I had postponed for years, starting with a gym that smelled of iron and sweat instead of citrus cleaner and smoothie bars, a place where effort was visible and nobody cared about my relationship status. Each workout felt like shedding layers of frustration I hadn't known I was carrying, and as my body grew stronger, so did my resolve. When she messaged me from across the ocean, her words were polite but probing, testing whether I missed her enough, whether the pause was hurting me as much as she expected, and I responded with the same restraint I had shown from the beginning. The absence of emotional drama seemed to unsettle her more than any argument could have, and I could almost feel her recalculating, wondering why I wasn't chasing her approval anymore. As the days passed, I started organizing finances, separating what was mine from what was shared, not out of spite, but out of necessity, and the process revealed how little we truly depended on each other in practical terms. The realization was both sobering and empowering, and it made me question how much of our bond was emotional reliance versus genuine partnership. When she called, frustrated by my calm, accusing me of indifference, I reminded her that this was the distance she had asked for, and that I was respecting the boundaries she had set. Her confusion was palpable, as if she expected me to wait in emotional limbo while she explored her independence, and the irony of that expectation was not lost on me. I filled my evenings with activities that required focus and creativity, enrolling in a woodworking class at a local community center, something I had once mentioned in passing only to be discouraged from pursuing. The smell of sawdust and the rhythm of sanding became therapeutic, grounding me in the present moment, and each piece I shaped felt like tangible proof that I could build something for myself without permission. When she discovered this new hobby, her reaction was a mix of disbelief and subtle jealousy, and I realized how accustomed she had become to defining the limits of my world. Her calls grew more frequent, more urgent, and when I missed one because I was busy, her irritation revealed the contradiction in her request for space. She wanted distance on her terms, not mine. The conversations that followed were heavy with unspoken tension, each of us circling the truth without nomming it, and when she finally accused me of not caring, I told her that I cared about being in a relationship where both people chose each other freely, not out of obligation or fear. Her silence on the other end of the line spoke louder than any argument, and I felt the shift inside me, the quiet acceptance that whatever happened next, I would not return to the version of myself who shrank to keep someone else comfortable. By the time she decided to cut her trip short, announcing her return without asking, I was no longer anxious about what she might say or do. I had prepared myself emotionally and practically, and the realization that I was ready for that confrontation felt like crossing an invisible threshold. The pause she requested had become my awakening, a period of self-discovery she never anticipated, and as I waited for her arrival, I understood that the outcome no longer depended on her choice alone. When she walked back into our home, carrying unfamiliar energy and expectations, she seemed startled by the subtle changes, by the evidence of a life that had continued without her. We sat across from each other, not touching, and she confessed regret, fear, and a sudden desire to restore what we had, but her words felt reactive rather than reflective, driven by the realization that she could lose control of the narrative. I listened without interrupting, then told her the truth, that I had learned I could stand on my own, that I no longer needed a relationship that required pauses to survive, and that I deserved a partnership built on mutual respect rather than emotional leverage. The room felt heavy with finality as she struggled to accept that the clarity she sought had arrived for both of us, just not in the way she imagined. I placed the folder on the table, not as a threat but as a symbol of my resolve, and explained that while reconciliation was possible, It would require a fundamental change, not just promises born from fear. Her tears, once so powerful, no longer dictated my decisions, and in that moment I felt a calm certainty I had never known before. She eventually left to stay elsewhere, and as the door closed behind her, I realized that the quiet in the house was no longer intimidating. It was peaceful, filled with the promise of a life lived authentically. The pause she had initiated had given me something far more valuable than time. It had given me the chance to rediscover who I was when I wasn't trying to be enough for someone else. She reached out again the next evening, her voice softer but layered with urgency, as if the reality of my calm response had begun to unravel the certainty she once carried. She spoke about fear, about realizing how fragile everything felt when she was thousands of miles away, and about how the thought of me moving forward without her unsettled her more than she expected. I listened without interruption, noticing how every sentence circled back to her discomfort rather than any understanding of what I had endured for years. When she asked what I wanted, the question felt strange, because it was the first time she had ever asked it sincerely. I told her I wanted a relationship where choices were shared, not dictated, and where love was expressed through respect rather than control. The silence that followed was heavy, not with anger, but with the weight of truths she could no longer avoid. And in that quiet, I felt the certainty grow that our lives were already moving in different directions. The days that followed were marked by a subtle shift in her behavior, a desperate attempt to reconnect through messages filled with memories, photographs, and long explanations that blurred the line between apology and self-defense. Each time I responded with calm detachment, she seemed to grow more anxious, as if my independence threatened the version of the future she had assumed was guaranteed. I realized then that the pause she requested was never meant to transform us both, only her, and that my own transformation had disrupted the balance of control she once held. With every exchange, I felt less tethered to the past and more rooted in the present, no longer defined by the expectations that had shaped my choices for so long. When she returned fully, bringing with her a whirlwind of emotions and promises, we sat in the living room where the furniture seemed rearranged by time rather than intention, and she spoke of wanting to start again as if the years between us could be erased by sheer will. I asked her what had truly changed, and when she struggled to answer, I understood that her fear of losing me was not the same as her willingness to change. I told her that love without accountability was just a comfort, not a commitment, and that I could no longer accept a version of partnership that demanded I sacrifice my identity for the sake of stability. Her tears no longer felt like anchors pulling me back, but like reminders of how far I had come. The decision to move forward separately was not born of anger but of clarity, and as we discussed logistics, belongings, and the practical realities of disentangling our lives, I felt a steady resolve guiding each word. There was grief in acknowledging the end of something that once held so much promise, yet there was also relief in releasing myself from a cycle that had slowly eroded my sense of self. In those conversations, I recognized that closure did not come from understanding every mistake, but from choosing not to repeat them. As she packed the last of her things, the house felt larger, echoing with possibilities instead of tension, and I realized that space, the very thing she had asked for, had become my greatest teacher. It showed me how much of myself I had abandoned in pursuit of harmony, and how reclaiming that identity brought a sense of peace I had never known. I spent my evenings refining the skills I had discovered, crafting pieces that carried the quiet satisfaction of something built with care and intention, and each finished project reminded me that I was capable of shaping my own future. The months that followed unfolded with a rhythm that felt entirely my own, filled with new friendships, physical challenges, and creative pursuits that grounded me in the present. I no longer measured my worth through someone else's approval, and in that freedom I discovered a confidence that felt both unfamiliar and deeply authentic. Life no longer revolved around avoiding conflict or proving devotion. Instead, it centered on growth, connection, and the simple joy of choosing my own path. Occasionally, memories of our life together surfaced, not as regrets but as lessons, reminders of what I would never compromise again. I learned that love should not require constant self-negotiation, and that true partnership thrives on mutual respect rather than unspoken control. Each realization strengthened my resolve, reinforcing that the clarity gained during that pause was not temporary, but transformative. One afternoon, I crossed paths with her unexpectedly, and the encounter was brief yet revealing, marked by polite conversation and a quiet understanding that we had both changed. There was no bitterness, only acceptance, and as we went our separate ways, I felt grateful for the journey that had led me to this moment of self-assurance. The past no longer defined me. It simply informed the choices I made going forward. I returned to my daily routines with a renewed sense of purpose, embracing challenges that once would have intimidated me, and celebrating small victories that affirmed my independence. The life I was building felt honest, rooted in self-respect and driven by curiosity rather than fear. Each day became a testament to the power of choosing oneself, even when it meant letting go of what was once cherished. Looking back, I realized that the pause she requested was never about distance or time, but about control and certainty, and in releasing that control, I found my own. The clarity she sought had arrived, not as a reconciliation, but as a revelation that reshaped my understanding of love and self-worth. In that discovery, I found freedom, and in that freedom, I found myself. And so, as I move forward, I carry with me the knowledge that sometimes endings are not failures, but beginnings in disguise, opportunities to grow into the person we were always meant to be. The pause that once felt like a threat became a gift, a turning point that allowed me to step into a life defined not by what I lost, but by everything I gained.